the Sevens is always a big draw factor for fans around the region, and for us it's also a good time for networks, friendships, and all the good stuff that comes out of that, right? Having said that, I think we also have an opportunity to focus more on our domestic rugby. Our high performance unit had to regroup, really think of creative ways of how to engage the players and keep them sort of fit. Yeah, we made most of what we could, and hopefully we can start kicking off soon. I mean, if we do try to implement some of these laws, and we haven't decided anything like that yet, you probably see sort of a faster game, less contact, less breakdown. I think from a viewing perspective, it seems to me that the game in essence won't change that much.
So Daniel Mak Chow, DMC, not many people know, but you and me both served NS in the same army unit. Great to see you around once again, especially now that things are clearing up here in Singapore. It's been 18 months into your tenure as GM for SRU. How would you say it's gone so far?
Yeah, 18 months flew by pretty quickly, actually. I think it was a pretty tough year for me last year. When I came in, obviously we had a relatively new board which wanted to take the organization to a different direction. So there were a lot of changes, a lot of transitional things, including staff and processes, things like that. And it being the SEA Games here last year, the departure of our technical director mid-year was also difficult for me because I, in some way, had to take on some of his role. So managed that part of the organization. Unfortunately, we didn't do too well from a performance perspective, especially at the SEA Games without any medals. So that's unfortunate. However, we were lucky, and we were taking good steps in hiring a new high performance person to take charge of that part, and as well as a bit of the rugby ecosystem piece. So we got Simon Mannix on board. He is actually our national team's director, so fully in charge of the national team, as well as some of the pathways leading up to it. So this year, coming out to this year, we actually focus a lot more on the administrative part of the organization. Obviously, COVID pointed us more into that direction. We couldn't do much on the field, and there's a lot of structural things that we're doing in the union, which were really, really important, but often overlooked by more pressing sort of on the field activity. So yeah, it was a good 3-4 months working from home, and really busy, contrary to the popular belief. But yeah, we did a lot of good work on an executive level, working well with the committee to sort of start to draft out a new path for the organization.
One of the big sporting events in the Singapore sports calendar is the Singapore Rugby Sevens. News has filtered through that it has been cancelled in 2020. What impact will this have on Singapore Rugby?
Yeah, it's obviously pretty disappointing not to have that around. I think from a commercial and from an engagement point of view, we have been affected. As well, the Sevens is always a big draw factor for fans around the region, and for us it's also a good time for building the regional networks, friendships, and all the good stuff that comes out of that, right? So that's an opportunity missed. But having said that, I think we also have an opportunity to focus more on our domestic rugby, trying to make it more engaging, more competitive, and looking at other means to try to engage our community, extend our community. So digitally, we have to probably look into making more content, and also working with the partners or the unions around us, that how we can join up, work together, and perhaps as a region we could share content and make rugby a bit more vibrant despite the limitations that we have.
So let's go back to March when everything stopped for Singapore Rugby. Circuit breaker was enforced. What did SRU do to keep the players engaged, to help their development, and to keep them motivated throughout this period?
Yeah, so it was pretty unfortunate because we had just implemented a training program and we was sort of just getting momentum from January to March. So quite a shame that it had to be cut short halfway. In the meantime, our high performance unit had to regroup, really think of creative ways of how to engage the players and keep them sort of fit during this period of lockdown. So our our play engagement were largely limited to remote training. Our SNC coach was in constant contact with the players as well as the coaching staff to ensure that our players still maintain some level of fitness. And of course, there's limitations like lack of equipment, but I think there's still a lot of work that could be done from a body weight perspective, which I think our SNC team has been working hard on. At the same time, I think it was a good time for the high performance unit and actually the players from an individual point of view to sort of regroup and reflect on how they want to take things moving forward. And a lot of things that we didn't have a chance to work on, like mobility issues, rehab, stuff like that, that this period actually gave the chance for players to really work on. So yeah, we made most of what we could, and hopefully we can start kicking off soon.
And not just the players, but over the last few months, we've also seen on social media that SRU has engaged with the coaches and with the referees. What was the thinking behind this?
The other thing that we were working hard on is actually the national team coaches and the coaches in general. I think the other strategy of improving our national team performance, other than focusing directly on the national team, was to improve the standard of domestic rugby. So we believe that if we improve the local club standards, and generally the stronger national team will follow. So we've been working hard on that. We want to align club coaches and school coaches to our national team programs, keep them in the same direction, and we want to increase the level of coaching, upskill the coaches, introduce more technology to these guys, and hopefully they bring them back to their clubs in their schools and also improve the standards out there. Now, beyond COVID, I think we will still continue to employ this online coaching or online coach the coaches sessions. I think the use of technology is really going to be a force multiplier for us. As you know, in Singapore, the coaches are, and most of the clubs are amateur, so we don't really get that face-to-face time with them. And I'm really happy to see a lot of the coaches that come on board, but we haven't really got everyone bought in yet. And I really urge coaches that haven't come on board to please arrange a session with us, and we would like to see them involved in the sessions in the near future.
It's good to see that sport and rugby is slowly returning to Singapore. Is there a challenge though for Singapore rugby compared to the likes of tennis, table tennis, badminton, where it's a big group of players coming together compared to those sports where it's just one-on-one and social distancing isn't really that much of an issue?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of perspectives. The first one, probably the venue, because we play in a big open space, we play in football fields. We may not have necessarily have control over the area as well. So from a capacity perspective, I think that's another limitation that we have. And I think rugby being a contact sport, you really can't run away from the proximity, the contact part of it, even in a touch or a tag variant. And while we have plans to, and we have measures that allow training to continue, it just limits the whole training quite substantially. So while we can start training, it's very limited at the moment, and yeah, we certainly aren't able to be playing games at this point in time.
So rugby is returning. How will training be conducted?
So trainings right now are conducted, from my understanding, at a club level. Separating these groups of 5, keeping the equipment within this group of 5, and coaches obviously standing in a reasonable distance from the groups. And on top of that, there has to be a safety officer appointed in this club that would ensure that all these measures are being taken. Even the peripheral region where people may come in or come out to ensure that the capacity is still at the correct guidelines, within the correct guidelines. And I think it's also entry and exit of the pitch that is also important. So it's really going to the fine details, and it's quite a big ask for a club to undertake such measures.
Is it easier for the implementation of these rules to be enforced on perhaps the sevens or the variant of 5 compared to the full rugby 15s?
Yeah, you're right. I think that's a good question, but from our point of view, we'll probably keep it all the same. I think even at a lower sided game like in the sevens or maybe in the new variant 5s, you're still going to have the challenges of playing against each other. So it's like 7 on 7 will probably be 14, 5 on 5 will be 10, and then you got the referees, the touch judges, medical staff. So collectively, you're looking at quite a lot of people on the pitch at any one time. So essentially, I think the limitations still stand, and when it opens up, it'll probably open up for everyone.
What are the key considerations and what plans are being put in place in SRU's Safe Return to Sport plan?
Yeah, so we want to really be closely aligned with Sport SG, and we're really strict about that, as well as we have the input from World Rugby. And from there, we sort of drill into our sport, drill into our region as a context, Singapore in context, and we try to put up as practical means as possible for clubs and teams to undertake. So like you mentioned earlier, it's that with 5 within a group, and of course distancing within a group, coaches standing at a reasonable distance. I think that's, from a transmission point of view, I think that's the measures that we'll be taking. But also another thing, rugby being a contact sport, and if we're going to start rugby games proper, it's going to be quite intense. So we are very, very wary about players not training for such a long period of time and jumping straight into contact. So there's another element of safety that we are looking into, and that would be at least a 6 to 8 week period where we require training to start before they can actually get onto the field and play a proper game. So it's actually not just on the transmission point of view, but actually also from a contact point of view that we are concerned.
So when rugby does return, we do expect it to be played behind closed doors. Is there a worry that the entertainment value will be impacted when it does return?
We will remain flexible and adaptable, and we will obviously monitor the situation as closely as we can. However, if I take today's rules from a capacity perspective, it's going to be tough for us to conduct games in the closed stadiums. So really, we're only going to start games when further measures are lifted. But even having said that, there's also been talk of trial laws from a World Rugby perspective. They are talking about reduced scrums, or maybe capping the number of scrums per game, rucks in the tackle area, focusing on areas where there's a lot of close contact and seeing if they can reduce that. I mean, if we do try to implement some of these laws, and we haven't decided anything like that yet, you probably see sort of a faster game, less contact, less breakdown. I mean, we'll be affected in terms of less technical area exposure, like less scrums and less mauls maybe. But I think from a viewing perspective, it seems to me that the game in essence won't change that much. And probably to address the capacity issues, we may probably take our content online and digital, or hopefully we can reach out to more of the spectators that can't come to the site itself.
Now looking into your crystal ball, in the future, when rugby does return, what are some of the key challenges that you envisage?
For rugby in Singapore, I think resource is the number one issue. As you know, rugby is still an amateur sport in Singapore, and most of these clubs are mainly volunteer run. Now, as much as everyone wants to get back on the paddock, there are issues with how can we enforce these rules? How can we make sure that these measures are strictly being taken? And from a club, pushing the responsibility back to a club, it's going to be tough to hire people to actually maintain these standards. You're talking about maybe even hiring more coaches to watch smaller groups as they are sort of divided across the whole field. I think to me, resource is really going to be tough. We will try to work with the clubs as much as possible. We will try to help where we can. However, I think from a practical approach, it's not just the clubs. I think from our own national team perspective, we are actually looking forward to more measures being lifted before we can really push out our field training plans.
I will save the best question for last, and it is the question on everyone's lips that is associated with Singapore rugby. When can we expect competitions and tournaments to begin?
So as it stands, we have our under 19s competition scheduled for September. Originally, it was meant to start in August, but we've pushed that back. And for that to start, it will mean that full training needs to be able to begin late July, early August. So we are monitoring the timelines as such. And then moving on from that, we want to kick off our National League in November. So touch wood, if everything goes well, we will be looking to start rugby in September this year.